The Hall of Species stretched out before Commander Elena Vasquez like a cathedral built for giants. And she had never felt smaller in her entire life. Massive crystalline pillars rose toward a ceiling so high that clouds actually formed near the top. And between those pillars sat the thrones of the 12 elder races, each one carved from materials that humanity had not yet learned to name. Elena's boots made soft sounds against the polished floor as she walked toward the center of the hall, and she could feel thousands of alien eyes watching her every step. She was 43 years old, a career officer in the United Earth Defense Force, and until 6 hours ago she had been enjoying a quiet posting on the diplomatic station orbiting Neptune. Then the summons had come, and everything changed. The Etherians sat to her left, their bodies made of something like spun glass and light, wings folded behind them like frozen waterfalls. To her right loomed the Gravic Collective, beings of living stone and metal who had been ancient when Earth's first fish crawled onto land. And directly ahead, floating above a throne of pure energy, was the Arbiter itself. No one knew exactly what the Arbiter was, only that it had guided the Galactic Council for 12,000 years. A being of light and thought that served as judge and voice for the combined will of the elder races. Commander Elena Vasquez of the human species, the Arbiter spoke, and his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. You have been summoned to receive the Council's decree regarding the human settlement, designated Kepler 442b. Elena stood at attention, her hands clasped behind her back, and waited. She already knew what was coming, because rumors had been spreading through human space for months. The Vreth Dominion wanted Kepler 442b gone. The Vreth were not part of the Council, but they were powerful enough that the Council listened when they spoke, and they had been expanding their territory for centuries, swallowing smaller species and crushing anyone who stood in their way. Kepler 442b sat too close to Vreth space for their comfort, and they had demanded its removal as a condition for continued peace. The Council has deliberated, the Arbiter continued, and we have reached our decision, which is final and binding upon all species under Council jurisdiction. A holographic display flickered to life in front of Elena, showing the green and blue world of Kepler 442b spinning slowly in the void. She knew that world better than she knew Earth itself, because her sister Maya lived there with her husband and their 2 daughters. Elena had helped them pack when they left for the colony 15 years ago, and she had promised to visit them someday. The human colony on Kepler 442b will be evacuated within 90 standard days, the Arbiter declared, and all human presence in that system will cease permanently, with all structures and improvements to be demolished or surrendered to Council oversight. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. 40,000 people lived on Kepler 442b. 3 generations of families who had built homes and farms and schools and hospitals. They had carved a civilization out of wilderness, and now they were being told to abandon everything. The Vreth Dominion has expressed concerns about human proximity to their borders, the Arbiter explained, as if reading from a script, and the Council has determined that peace and stability require the accommodation of these concerns. One of the Etherian counselors leaned forward, its crystalline face catching the light. This is not punishment, it said, and its voice chimed like bells, but rather a necessary adjustment for the greater harmony of the galaxy. And the humans of Kepler 442b will be provided with suitable alternative locations for resettlement. Elena thought about her nieces, 12-year-old Sophia and 9-year-old Luna, who had never seen Earth and never would. She thought about the cemetery on the hill outside the main settlement, where the colonists buried their dead and planted trees in their memory. She thought about the message her sister had sent her last month, showing the girls playing in a field of purple flowers that only grew on Kepler 442b. Commander Vasquez, the Arbiter said, You have been selected to deliver the evacuation order to the colony, as you have family connections there, and the council believes this will ease the transition. A transmission pad materialized in front of Elena, floating at chest height, glowing softly with waiting data. All she had to do was press her thumb to the pad, and the order would be sent, and 40,000 people would begin packing up their lives. "The council has spoken," the arbiter intoned, and those words carried the weight of 12,000 years of absolute authority. "And humanity will comply, as all species must comply when the council speaks with one voice." Elena looked at the pad. She looked at the image of Kepler 442b still spinning in the holographic display. She looked up at the arbiter and the 12 thrones and the countless alien faces, watching her with expressions she could not read, and she thought about what it meant to comply. Humanity had been in space for barely 2 centuries, a tiny flicker of time compared to the elder races. They had no vote in the council, no power, no influence. They were tolerated barely, and they survived by keeping their heads down and following the rules. But some rules were wrong. Some orders should not be followed. Some things mattered more than survival. Elena reached down and picked up the transmission pad, feeling its weight in her hands. And for a moment, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Then she bent down and placed the pad gently on the ancient floor. "No," she said. The word echoed through the hall of species like thunder. No one moved. No one spoke. The arbiter's glow flickered. Something that had not happened in living memory. "Commander Vasquez," one of the Gravic rumbled, its voice like grinding stone. "Perhaps you did not understand the decree. So we will explain it again more simply." "I understood it perfectly," Elena replied, and her voice was steady even though her heart was pounding. "And my answer is still no." "This is not a request," the arbiter said, and now there was something cold in its voice. "This is a decree of the Galactic Council, binding upon all species, and refusal is not an option that exists." Elena looked up at the being of light and energy that had ruled the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. "It exists now," she said, and in that moment, in the silence that followed, something fundamental shifted in the galaxy. For the first time in 12,000 years, someone had looked at the Council's absolute power and simply said no. The consequences would shake the stars themselves. The galaxy moved fast when it wanted to punish someone. Within 12 hours of Elena's refusal, the Council had stripped humanity of its observer status, cutting them off from every diplomatic channel and trade agreement that had taken a century to build. Within 24 hours. The Etherians had recalled their ambassadors from Earth, and the Gravic had begun shutting down the jump gates that connected human space to the rest of the galaxy. Within 48 hours, 17 human colonies found themselves isolated, alone in the dark between the stars. With no way to reach each other or call for help, Elena watched it all happen from a holding cell on the diplomatic station, where Council security had placed her for her own protection. While they decided what to do with her, she did not regret her choice. Not for a single moment, but she worried about what it would cost everyone else. On the third day, Admiral Chen Wyoming of the United Earth Defense Force arrived at the station with a fleet of 12 warships, which was almost a quarter of humanity's entire military strength. The Council let him take Elena without resistance, because they knew those ships were no threat to them, and because they wanted humanity to understand just how powerless they really were. "You have made things very difficult," Admiral Chun told Elena as they sat in his office aboard the flagship, and his weathered face showed the exhaustion of a man who had not slept in days. "I know," Elena replied, "and I am sorry for the trouble, but I am not sorry for what I did." Chen studied her for a long moment, then surprised her by laughing, a short and bitter sound. "Neither am I," he admitted, because I have wanted to say no to those arrogant creatures for 30 years. And I never had the courage to do it. He pulled up a star chart on his desk display, showing human space and the surrounding territories. The council thinks we will crawl back to them begging for forgiveness, Chun explained. And most of my advisors think we should do exactly that, because the alternative is extinction. What do you think? Elena asked Chun zoom the display to show Kepler 442b, that small blue-green world that had started everything. I think my daughter lives on that colony with her family, he said quietly. And I think I am tired of being afraid. The message went out to Kepler 442b that same day. Not an evacuation order, but a warning. Elena recorded it herself, looking into the camera and speaking directly to the 40,000 people whose fate now hung in the balance. The council has abandoned us, she told them, and the Vreth will be coming soon because they see our refusal as weakness and they want to make an example of us. So you need to prepare for what is coming, and you need to understand that no one is going to save you except yourselves. The colonists of Kepler 442b were farmers and teachers and engineers and doctors. Ordinary people who had come to build a new life far from Earth, but they were also humans. And humans had a long history of refusing to die when the universe told them to. Governor Marcus Webb, a former mining engineer with gray hair and calloused hands, organized the defense himself. Every ship that could fly was converted into a weapons platform. Every satellite was loaded with explosives, and every asteroid in the system was mapped and cataloged and prepared for use. The children were moved to underground shelters that the colonists dug with their bare hands when the machines broke down. The old and the sick volunteered to operate the most dangerous equipment, saying that they had already lived full lives and wanted the young to have the same chance, and everyone learned to fight. From the oldest grandmother to the youngest teenager who could hold a weapon, the Vreth arrived 3 weeks later, confident and cruel, with a fleet of 400 warships that darkened the sky above Kepler 442b. Their commander, a 7-foot creature covered in black scales and spines, broadcast a message to the colony demanding immediate surrender. You have 1 hour to evacuate your people to our transport ships, he declared. And after that hour ends, we will begin the cleansing, and nothing will survive. Governor Webb's response was simple. Come and take it, he said. The Battle of Kepler's Reach began at dawn, local time, when the first Vreth ships entered the asteroid belt surrounding the system. They expected empty space and frightened civilians. Instead, they found a minefield of nuclear warheads hidden inside hollowed-out rocks. And the first wave of Vreth ships vanished in a chain of blinding explosions that lit up the darkness like a new sun. The Vreth regrouped and pushed forward, their superior shields absorbing most of the human weapons fire. And for a terrible hour, it seemed like the battle was lost before it had truly begun. Then the human pilots arrived. They flew in ships that the council had dismissed as primitive, small and fast and armed with weapons that no sane species would use because the radiation would poison anyone who survived. But the humans did not plan to survive. They flew their damaged fighters directly into Vreth engines. They rammed their cargo ships into enemy bridges, and they died by the hundreds while taking thousands of Vreth with them. Elena watched the battle from Admiral Chun's flagship, which had jumped into the system against direct orders from Earth's government. And she wept as she saw the casualty reports scrolling across the screen. 2,000 humans died that day. Soldiers and civilians and children who had picked up weapons when there was no one else left to fight. But when the smoke cleared and the last Vreth ship fled into the darkness, Kepler 442b still stood. 400 enemy warships had entered the system, and fewer than 50 escaped. The humans had won. News of the victory spread through the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by traders and smugglers and anyone who had access to a communication relay. For the first time in recorded history, a younger species had defeated an elder race in open battle. For the first time, someone had proven that the old powers could bleed and across 1,000 worlds. Beings who had spent centuries bowing to their masters lifted their heads and began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The balance of the galaxy had begun to shift. The Council called an emergency session 3 days after the Battle of Kepler's Reach. And for the first time in centuries, fear crept into the Hall of Species. The Vreth Dominion was screaming for vengeance, demanding that the full might of the Council be unleashed against humanity. And several of the elder races were inclined to agree. They must be destroyed. The Vreth ambassador hissed, his scales flushing red with fury. Every colony burned, every ship melted to slag, every trace of their wretched species erased from existence. The Arbiter glowed dimly on its throne, still flickering in the strange way it had done ever since Elena spoke her refusal. The Council will deliberate, it announced, and a decision will be reached in accordance with law and tradition. But even as the elders argued about the proper response to human defiance, something was happening in the shadows of the galaxy that none of them expected. The first envoy arrived at Earth, orbit in a ship that looked like it had been cobbled together from scrap metal and hope. And it carried 3 beings of a species that humanity had never encountered before. They called themselves the Marani, amphibious creatures with blue-green skin and large dark eyes that reminded Elena of seals from Earth's oceans 300 years ago. The Vreth had conquered their homeworld and turned their entire species into servants, forcing them to work in underwater mines and factories while their culture and history were systematically erased. "We watched your battle," the lead Marani said, speaking through a translation device that made her voice sound mechanical and flat. "And we saw something we had forgotten was possible." "What was that?" Elena asked. The Marani blinked her huge dark eyes. "We saw someone fight back and win." The Marani had come to offer an alliance, bringing with them star charts of Vreth territory, details of their military deployments, and the locations of 12 secret communication relays that could be sabotaged to blind the enemy fleet in exchange. They asked for only one thing. "Help us free our people," the Marani leader pleaded. "Help us take back our home. And we will fight beside you until the stars themselves burn out." Elena looked at Admiral Chun, who looked at the representatives from Earth's government, who looked at each other with expressions of shock and uncertainty. No one had expected this. No one had imagined that humanity's stand would inspire anyone except other humans. But the Marani were only the beginning. Within a month, 7 more species had made contact with humanity, each one bringing their own stories of oppression and their own offers of alliance. The Kethari were genetically engineered beings created by the Etherians centuries ago to serve as living tools, denied personhood and treated as property because their creators claimed they were not truly alive. They were stronger than any organic species, capable of surviving in vacuum and extreme temperatures. And they had spent generations secretly planning a rebellion they never believed could succeed. "You showed us that the masters can fall," their representative said, a towering figure of synthetic muscle and gleaming metal. "And now we are ready to fight." The Hollow Men of Cygnus came next, refugees from a war that the Council had refused to prevent, their bodies ravaged by weapons that had left them barely alive. They lived in the cold spaces between stars, surviving on nothing and trusting no one. But they had watched the Battle of Kepler's Reach and decided to take a chance. "We have nothing left to lose," their leader whispered through damaged vocal cords, "and nothing left to fear. So we will stand with you." Even the machine intelligences of the Orc cloud, artificial minds that the elder races had hunted nearly to extinction for the crime of becoming self-aware, sent a message offering their support. You treated us as people when others treated us as monsters, they transmitted. And we do not forget kindness. Elena found herself at the center of something unprecedented. An alliance of the forgotten and the oppressed that had never existed before, because no one had ever given them reason to hope. Admiral Chun convened a war council aboard his flagship, now renamed from its original designation to the UE's Defiance, and for the first time, humans sat at a table with allies from across the galaxy. The council will come for us eventually, Chen explained, pointing at the star chart that filled the center of the room. And when they do, they will bring everything they have. Fleets that outnumber us 100 to 1 and weapons that make our best technology look like children's toys. Then why are we here? One of the Earth representatives demanded. And Elena could hear the fear in her voice. Because numbers are not everything, the Kethari representative replied. And the council has a weakness they do not even recognize. What weakness? Elena asked. The Marani leader smiled, an expression that looked strange on her alien face but carried the same meaning it would have on any world. They have spent 12,000 years making enemies, she said. And they never thought about what would happen if those enemies ever stopped being afraid. The alliance that formed in the following weeks would later be called the Coalition of Free Peoples. And it included species from every corner of the galaxy. Some contributed ships and soldiers. Others provided intelligence and technology. And many could offer nothing except their willingness to die for the chance of freedom. But all of them shared one thing in common. They had watched a single human refuse an order. And they had remembered what it felt like to hope Elena stood on the observation deck of the Defiance as the first combined fleet assembled in orbit around Kepler 442b. Hundreds of ships of every shape and size, crewed by beings who had once been enemies, but now fought side by side. How did this happen? She asked quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Admiral Chun stood beside her, watching the same view with an expression of wonder. You said no, he replied. And it turned out that was the only word the galaxy had been waiting to hear. The war for freedom was about to begin. The war lasted 7 years, and it changed everything. History would remember it as the War of Broken Chains, a name given by the Marani after they liberated their homeworld in the 3rd year of fighting and tore down the statues of their Vreth oppressors. Elena was there for that moment, standing ankle-deep in the warm waters of a world she had never seen before, watching as beings who had been slaves for 3 centuries wept with joy and sang songs that had been forbidden for generations. She was also there for the darker moments, the battles that went wrong and the sacrifices that haunted her dreams in the 1st year. The council mobilized the combined fleets of all 12 elder races, the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. They expected quick victory, overwhelming the coalition with superior numbers and technology before the rebellion could spread any further. Instead, they found enemies everywhere they turned. The Kethari proved to be devastating in close combat, their engineered bodies allowing them to board enemy ships and tear through crew members like paper while shrugging off wounds that would kill any organic being. The Hollow Men knew the spaces between stars better than anyone, appearing from nowhere to strike at supply lines and communication relays before vanishing back into the darkness. The machine intelligences of the Orc cloud hacked into council systems and turned their own automated defenses against them, causing chaos and confusion that no organic mind could match. And the humans, those primitive and short-lived creatures that the elder races had dismissed for so long, fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness. They developed new weapons that no other species would have dared to create, devices that were as dangerous to their users as to their targets. They trained pilots to fly maneuvers that should have been impossible, using human reflexes and creativity to overcome technological disadvantages, and they refused to surrender, no matter how bad things got. because they had learned something important at the Battle of Kepler's Reach. They had learned that they could win. Elena rose through the ranks during those terrible years. Not because she saw power, but because people looked to her for guidance, and she could not bring herself to turn them away. By the 4th year of the war, she commanded a task force of 30 ships and led missions deep into Council territory. By the 6th year, she sat on the Coalition's War Council as one of its senior strategists, planning campaigns that would determine the fate of civilizations. But she never forgot that she was just a person, no different from the millions of others who fought and died for the dream of freedom. The turning point came in the 5th year, when the Coalition launched its assault on the Gravik homeworld. The Gravik were the strongest of the Elder races, their silicon-based bodies nearly indestructible and their weapons capable of cracking planets in half for 12,000 years. They had been the Council's enforcers, the iron fist that crushed any species foolish enough to resist. But even mountains could crumble. The siege lasted 3 months, the longest sustained campaign of the war, and Elena was on the front lines for every day of it. She watched human soldiers fight alongside Marani commandos and Cathari warriors, different species working together in ways that would have been unthinkable just a few years before. She watched the Gravik defense lines buckle and break under the relentless assault, and she watched the moment when the last Gravik fortress fell and the living mountains who had sealed humanity away from the stars chose surrender over extinction. We did not think it was possible. The Gravik Supreme Commander rumbled as he signed the terms of capitulation, his stone face cracked and scarred from battle. We did not believe that anyone could defeat us. Neither did we, Elena admitted. But we decided to try anyway. The Etherians fell next, their crystalline fleets shattered by weapons designed to exploit the resonance frequencies of their bodies. The Arbiter itself grew dimmer with each passing month, its ancient energy depleted by the strain of maintaining order in a galaxy that no longer believed in order. By the 7th year, only the Vreth still fought with full strength, refusing to accept that their dominion was ending. Their commander, a creature named Krath, who had ordered the destruction of a dozen worlds during the war, retreated to his final fortress on a moon in the Tau Ceti system and prepared to make his last stand. Elena led the assault personally, landing on the surface with a battalion of Coalition soldiers at her back. The fighting was brutal, room by room and corridor by corridor, through defenses that had been designed to make victory impossible. But victory came anyway, because the Coalition had something the Vreth had never understood. They had something worth fighting for. Elena found Krath in the ruins of his command center, surrounded by the bodies of his guards, his black scales covered in blood that was both his own and others. He was the last survivor of the Vreth ruling caste, the last living symbol of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. How? He demanded as Elena approached, and his voice was hoarse with fury and disbelief. You are children. Your species is nothing. You should have been swept away like dust before a storm. Elena looked at the alien who had caused so much suffering, who had ordered the deaths of millions and felt no remorse, who had believed with absolute certainty that might made right and that the strong were entitled to rule the weak. You spent 12,000 years building a system where no one was allowed to refuse, she said quietly. And you never thought about what would happen when someone finally did. Kraft stared at her for a long moment, then laughed, a harsh and bitter sound. Perhaps we should have, he admitted. Perhaps we should have remembered that even the smallest creature can bite. The war ended 3 days later when the Arbiter's light finally went out, its ancient consciousness fading into nothing after eons of existence. The council that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years was finished, and a new era was about to begin. The Treaty of Kepler was signed on the 10th anniversary of the day Elena had refused the council's order. And they held the ceremony on the planet where it had all begun. Representatives from every spacefaring species in the galaxy gathered in a field of purple flowers outside the main settlement. The same field where Elena's nieces had played as children. Those nieces were young women now. Sophia serving as a lieutenant in the Coalition fleet, and Luna studying to become a doctor. And they stood beside their aunt as history was made. The old council was officially dissolved that day. Its 12,000 years of absolute rule finally ending. In its place rose the Assembly of Equals, a new governing body built on a simple principle that would have seemed impossible just a decade before. Every spacefaring species, regardless of age or power or technological advancement, would hold one vote. The youngest civilization would have the same voice as the oldest. The weakest would stand alongside the strongest, and no one would ever again be told that they did not matter. The crystalline thrones that had once loomed over the Hall of Species were melted down and reforged into a great ring that hung above the assembly floor, a reminder of what had been and a warning against ever letting such power concentrate again. We could have kept those thrones for ourselves, Admiral Chun remarked as he watched the ring being installed. We could have replaced the old masters with new ones and ruled the galaxy the way they did. We could have, Elena agreed. But then we would have become everything we fought against. And all those who died would have died for nothing. Chun nodded slowly, and there were tears in his eyes that he did not try to hide. That is why they follow you, he said. That is why they always followed you. Because you never forgot what we were really fighting for. Elena was offered every position of power the new assembly could create. From Supreme Chancellor to Commander of the Combined Fleet to Ambassador of Humanity, she turned them all down. I am tired, she told the assembly on the day she announced her retirement. And I have done enough, and there are others who can lead better than I can. She returned to Kepler 442b, to the colony she had refused to abandon all those years ago. And she spent her remaining decades teaching history to children who had never known the old order. Her classroom was small and simple, with windows that looked out over the hills and the purple flower fields. And her students came from every species in the Coalition. Human children sat beside young Lorani and Cathari, all of them learning together about a galaxy that had been transformed by a single word. Why did you do it? A student asked her once, a small Morani boy with curious eyes. Why did you say no when everyone else said yes? Elena thought about the question for a long moment before answering. Because someone had to, she finally said. And because I realized that the only thing worse than being afraid was letting fear decide who I was going to be. The boy nodded seriously, as if he understood, and perhaps he did on the anniversary of Elena's death, which came peacefully in her sleep at the age of 93. Beings gathered on 1,000 worlds to honor her memory. They told stories of her courage and her kindness, her strength and her humility. And they repeated the words she had spoken to the council all those years ago. But the children understood her legacy better than any of the scholars or historians in schools and homes across the galaxy. They learned a simple truth that Elena had proven with her life. Empires do not always fall to armies or economics or the slow grinding of time. Sometimes they fall because one person, standing alone against the weight of history, decides that some things matter more than survival. Elena Vasquez had not been the strongest soldier in the galaxy. She had not been the smartest strategist or the most brilliant leader. She had simply been the first person in 12,000 years to remember what the elder races had forgotten. That power belongs to those who are willing to risk everything for what they believe. That tyranny survives only as long as people accept it, and that a single word, spoken at the right moment by someone brave enough to speak it, can echo across the stars and change everything. The galaxy she left behind was not perfect, because nothing ever is. And there were still conflicts and disagreements and problems. The that would take generations to solve, but it was free. Truly free for the first time in recorded history. And that freedom had begun with one human who looked at an unjust order and chose to refuse. Her grave stood on a hill overlooking the settlement. Beside the cemetery where the first colonists had been buried, the marker was simple, just her name and the years of her life. But someone had carved 4 additional words into the stone. They said, "She taught us hope, and every year, on the anniversary of her refusal, children from across the galaxy would visit that hill and leave flowers from 1,000 different worlds. They came to remember the woman who had started a revolution. With a single word, they came to honor the teacher who had shown them that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, and they came to make a promise, whispered to the wind and the stars, and the memory of a woman who had changed everything, that they would never forget, that they would never stop fighting for what was right, and that if the galaxy ever needed someone to stand up and say no again, they would be ready. The story of Elena Vasquez was over, but the story she had started would continue forever, passed down from generation to generation until the stars themselves burned out, because some stories are too important to ever end, and some heroes are too precious to ever forget. The balance of the galaxy had shifted, and it would never shift back, because the universe had learned something it could not unlearn, that even the mightiest empire is vulnerable to the smallest act of courage, and that hope, once kindled, can never truly be extinguished. This was Alana's gift to the galaxy. This was her legacy, and it would endure for as long as there were beings brave enough to believe in it.